Once these countries formed a large and powerful empire consisting of two sovereign states, Cisleithania, the Austrian Empire, and Transleithania, the Kingdom of Hungary. However, the empire broke up into three independent states – Austria, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, and now only the old Austro-Hungarian standards are reminiscent of the former greatness, which soar over dilapidated fortresses to attract tourists. Otherwise, Austria and Hungary are as different today as heaven and earth, and their racetracks are no exception. Between these two autodromes, Hungarian and A1 ring, there are only about 6 to 7 hours by car. In addition, these two routes, like the two once sovereign countries, are absolutely different from each other, but still there is definitely a slight similarity. Hungary and A1 ring are almost the same in terms of elevation and length. But even taking into account this fact, these racetracks symbolize two polar views on speed, and in this regard the low-speed nature of the Hungarian route cannot be compared with the cocky and sometimes even insidious temper of its Austrian neighbor. The Formula One championship came to Austria in 1964. The leadership of the federation and the teams have long wanted to exclude the South African Grand Prix from the calendar due to difficulties with very expensive delivery of cars and other racing equipment, acclimatization and organizational problems. On the taxiway of a small military airfield in Styria, not far from Graz, a track was built, which they called Zellweg. In plan, it consisted of two rather long straight lines, connected on one side by an almost circular curve of small radius, Zudenburg-Kurve, and on the other by a loop resembling a crab claw. The first race, held on August 23, 1964, didn't affect the fate of the championship. All the leaders for one reason or another left the race, and Lorenzo Bandini on the Ferrari entered the history of the Austrian stage as the first winner. The racers didn't really like the track. It was simple and technically uninteresting,
boring,
which led to its low popularity both among the drivers and the spectators. And in terms of organization, it was much inferior to the usual stages. And for 5 years, Formula One left Austria. In 1970, a new track was opened not far from the venue of the first race, and the Austrian Grand Prix entered the championship again. Austria was built in a very beautiful place, successfully fitting the turns into the terrain. The track immediately established itself as a very fast one. It rarely happened that the average speed of the winner fell below 200 km per hour. During free practice before 1975 Austrian round, American racer Montoya was involved in an accident due to a burst tire on his March 751 and died 3 days later in a hospital in Graz. There was an attempt to sue Goodyear, but everything was sorted out somehow. After the death in 1975 of the American racer Mark Donner, the first turn after the start, hell lift, in which the disaster occurred, was reprofiled, and the lap length decreased by 2 meters. A year later, the same turn was rebuilt radically. It became Z-shaped, which, according to the organizers' intention, was to reduce the maximum speeds of cars. But their hopes weren't destined to come true. In 1987, it was at this turn at the beginning of the race that 2 blockages occurred, and the organizer had to start the race 3 times. After that, the Austrian was recognized as dangerous for racing Formula One cars, and the Austrian Grand Prix again disappeared from the World Championship calendar for 9 years. In 1997, racing returned to Austria again. The track was significantly rebuilt and renamed in honor of the main sponsor of the stage, the Austrian telecommunication company A1 Mobilcom. In practice, this the Austria-Ring made in accordance with all the new trends in the field of ensuring the safety of participants in the competition. The configuration of the track is very similar to the outlines of the Austrian Ring. However, now the straight lines have become shorter, and the turning radius is smaller. Security zones were increased. Certain sections of the track were equipped with tech-pro barriers. A press center and many other facilities appeared to provide everything necessary for the race. The circle in Spielberg, Austria is located at an altitude of 640 meters above sea level, so the drivers have to spin the turbine to high speed to compensate for the low air pressure. At the circle in Spielberg, there are 9 turns and a long straight in the first sector, where you can overtake when braking. In addition, DRS and ERS have added overtaking opportunities for drivers, reducing the likelihood of boring track passage. Most of the time, drivers have to press the gas pedal at full strength. This is facilitated by 4 straight and long sections. The first 3 slow corners are preceded by long straights where the speed exceeds 300 km per hour. But in general, the load on the brakes and tires during the lap isn't very large. The new Zeltweg retained its reputation as a fast-moving ring, which made the Austrian Grand Prix a spectacular one. However, this didn't save the Austrian run from being eliminated from the World Championship calendar starting in 2004. However, before the new disappearance of the track from the Formula 1 calendar, several events had time to happen on this track. The Austrian Grand Prix was round 6 on the Formula 1 calendar in 2001. On the night of Saturday to Sunday, David Coulthard dreamed that he was taking the lead in the A1 ring. An amazing dream turned out to be prophetic. Starting from a seemingly hopeless 7th place, Coulthard won in Austria. But the events that preceded this were reminiscent of another dream, a nightmare. Arriving in Austria, David Coulthard and Mika Häkkinen began to share their optimistic plans with journalists. According to the drivers, they were going to take 16 points at the A1 ring, that is, to win first and second places. However, then it seems that nothing was impossible in this. After all, McLaren has already twice in 1998 and 2000 made a winning double at the A1 ring. Häkkinen was the first in both cases. A representative of Ferrari won here only once, in 1999, and it was not Michael Schumacher, but Eddie Irvine, who was then performed for the Scuderia. Well, optimism is a good thing. However, during the qualification, Ron Dennis probably more than once remembering the talkativeness of his guys with an unkind word. McLaren not only lost the qualification, the team failed in all respects. Häkkinen even didn't get close to pole position, and Coulthard was generally somewhere in the second 5. As a result, David and Mika ended up in 7 and 8 starting places, respectively. What is the reason for such a poor performance for the top team? Adrian Newey, the man in charge of the speed of the silver cars, seems to know the answer. According to him, the team decided to put rolled tires on the front and new ones on the rear of the cars of Mika and David. This choice was made not only by McLaren, but for some reason it was with their chassis that such a combination gave a result that was directly opposite to what was expected. The series of bad luck didn't end there. Specialists responsible for the operation of the electronics of Formula cars, in particular for the traction control system, will remember the start of the Austrian Grand Prix for a long time to come. At the start, 4 cars froze motionless at once, and all from the top 10. I would especially like to sympathize with the engineers of the Jordan team. Both cars and Frentzen and Trulli remained on the starting line. They were combined by Mika Häkkinen's McLaren and Nick Heidfeld's Sauber. For each of the races, this episode was offensive. However, he inflicted especially strong moral damage on Mika Häkkinen. The Finnish driver was still able to move off and even draw one lap, but the gearbox refused to work, and the race ended for Mika. Now it turns out that Mika has no more chances to win the championship. While the track workers were removing cars that had stalled at the start, the rate of progress along the track of all the rest was determined by the safety car. And then, once again, the truth was confirmed that there are no uninteresting races in Austria. Top drivers spun such an intrigue. Ralf Schumacher didn't let his brother forward for some time, but soon dropped out of the fight due to the problems with the brakes. Meanwhile, Montoya, who was breaking away from his pursuers, was driving more and more slowly. As Pierre Dupasquier, a representative of Michelin, later said, the running-in features of their tires with a tread pattern were to blame. According to the Frenchman, these difficulties last only a dozen laps, no more, but they came at the wrong time, exactly at the moment when Michael Schumacher, no longer restrained by his brother, rushed in pursuit of Montoya. It took only 4 laps for the world champion to overtake his opponent, and then the fight began equally tough on both sides. In the end, everything ended in a mutual departure. Returning to the track, Michael and Juan Pablo had every opportunity to continue the fight, but not for the leadership, but for the 6th position. 5 races swept past them. However, Montoya's car was damaged, and being in front, Schumacher didn't let him in. If it were not for the excessive perseverance of the Colombian, then he would have had a great chance to take the podium in this race. But who determines the permissible measure of perseverance? At the moment, Barrichello was in the lead, not without reason believing that it was he who would win. However, the McLaren team had one tactical surprise. Considering what move could have Coulthard after a failed qualifying, Ron Dennis came to the conclusion that this was a very late stop in the pits. Therefore, at the start, the tanks of David's car were filled to capacity. And then everything turned out exactly as it was beneficial to the Scots. When it was time for the rivals to refuel, including Barrichello, who had been leading until that moment, Coulthard's silver car was driving and driving along the track. Even the circles that came across on the way didn't prevent David from attacking aggressively during these circles. In the end, he created a sufficient margin of time to remain in the lead after his refueling. But it soon became clear that Barrichello wasn't capable of catching up with the Scot. Schumacher, who was behind the Brazilian, began to call the leaders of his team on the radio. Ross Brown engine Todd heeded the request of the leader of the World Championship and handed over to Barrichello the demand to let his partner go. Rubens was in no hurry to do it. In the end, at the Ferrari stand, they became agitated and began to repeat their order to Rubens already in categorical form.
Rubens, it's last lap. Let Michael pass for the championship. Let Michael pass for the championship, Rubens, please.
As a result, the Brazilian obeyed, passing Schumacher at the finish line. At a press conference, Barrichello said that he was upset not at all by the order of the team, but by the fact that Coulthard managed to intercept the victory from Ferrari. However, it was clear that this wasn't the only issue, and it was this behavior as a team that caused the appearance of moment of truth for Formula One fans already in 2002 at the same Austrian Grand Prix. May 12, 2002, 15:37 Central Europe time. This moment of a huge number of people became the moment of truth. It was at this moment that Formula One died for them. In the first minutes after the finish of the Austrian GP, the situation was tense to the limit. The stands were noisy, and it was simply terrible to look at the main characters of the tragicomedy that had played out. The face of Rubens Barrichello, whom Michael Schumacher literally pushed to the highest step of the pedestal, convulsively twitched, like a man who could hardly contain his sobs. Michael, on the other hand, wiped away one stingy male tear after another. It was only unclear who he felt sorry for, his partner or himself, who found himself in a position that can only be called stupid. Shortly before the Austrian Grand Prix, Jackie Stewart, talking about the protracted triumph of Schumacher, expressed the idea: "You still can't embrace the immensity, so Michael needs to live in time until his unconditional leadership is shaken. Like, what else does a person who has earned such a lot of victories, records and money need to calmly and adequately meet old age?" At the 2002 Austrian Grand Prix, an event that received a negative assessment of the public occurred after Rubens Barrichello from the pits of the Ferrari team received a command at the finish line to give up the leading position to second-placed Michael Schumacher. This was the third race for Schumacher at the A1 ring, when a teammate let him go ahead. The first time the German was missed by Eddie Irvine at the 1998 Austrian Grand Prix, the second time at the 2001 Austrian Grand Prix. The same Barrichello lost the second position on the team from the boxes. And in this regard, a logical question arises. Is Schumacher directly to blame for what happened? Eddie Irvine, who knows the situation at Ferrari firsthand, believes that no, he isn't to blame, since Michael's hands are bound by the contract to the same extent as Barrichello's hands. It's more appropriate to talk about personal responsibility not for a specific unsportsmanlike finish, but initially for signing a contract that dictates the appropriate condition to the racer. And, in fact, this is exactly what Rubens Barrichello admitted in the very first seconds of the press conference after the Austrian GP, greeted nevertheless by the journalist with a real ovation.
Rubens, how difficult was it to make the decision to move over on the last lap?
I think I had the experience actually, so it wasn't. It's not. I'm not joking on that. It's something that I've been asked to. I've said nothing, and just I think it's a team decision. I just signed a 2-year contract with them, and I thought I should have respect.
In other words, Rubens openly confirms the existence of a clause in the contract obliging him to let the Schumacher forward if such a decision was made by the team management. This is also confirmed by Schumacher, met by media representatives unlike Barrichello with a long disapproving rumble and whistle.
Obviously, you've taken no joy from this victory.
Very obvious. As Rubens pointed out, it was a team decision last year. I sort of was involved in the situation because I felt the championship was much more tighter than it was this year. This year I didn't even think about this, and before the race I was asking, I said, I don't believe there's going to be a team strategy involved, and suddenly they told me that he would move over, and yeah, I mean, I'm not very pleased about it either. I think nobody of us is, honestly.
But what then is driving Ferrari in this already looking almost pathological pursuit of victories? The answer is simple: money. But not just the money, but the huge money that the team received for its unprecedented success. Finally, the final fragment of the press conference after the race without any comments. Michael, is this a sport? It is the purpose of the auto racing. Michael, do you want to win the championship as best driver or as the driver with the best contract? You all talk about the fact that such team tactics are normal, since this is a team sport. Then why is there driver standings? After 11 years, the Austrian Grand Prix has returned to Formula 1. This was made possible thanks to the owner of the Red Bull company, as well as the Formula 1 teams Red Bull Racing and Scuderia Toro Rosso, Dietrich Mateschitz, who bought the racing complex in 2008 and modernized it, as well as built new stands. The route configuration hasn't changed. Mateschitz renamed the A1 Ring the Red Bull Ring. The necessary documents for holding the Austrian Grand Prix at the reconstructed Red Bull Ring were signed in early July 2013. And the following year the legendary racing returned to the country. The Austrian stage, which appeared again in Formula 1 calendar, was appreciated by everyone, both lovers of the speed and drive, and teams and drivers. It was this circus that gave us the much anticipated start of 2020 season at the time of COVID, when it seemed that the year would pass without Formula 1 racing.